All right. Last thing, this one takes the most amount of time, which is why I've, hopefully this won't be too long of notes for you to complete. So hopefully you have time for your homework today. Okay, so perpendicular bisectors. Perpendicular bisectors are an intersection between two lines, segments. You have to start with a segment because the idea is a perpendicular bisector, there's two parts to it. There's the perpendicular aspect to it and the bisect part to it. So perpendicular means that they intersect at 90 degrees. What that means, if we're talking about it algebraically on a coordinate plane, is that their slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. So negative reciprocal slopes. I've seen a couple of you guys say negative inverse in your play posits, and that is not true. Inverse is something completely different. Remember that inverse is when your inputs and your outputs are switched. It's not when you flip a fraction. Those two are different things. So it's a very common mistake to call them inverses or and reciprocals the same, because the idea of flipping something is ringing in your head of causing a connection between these two. But it's a different type of flipping. Reciprocal is flipping a fraction this way, and inverse is like flipping your or turning around your inputs and your outputs. So a different type of flipping. So the idea of perpendicular is that it means that it creates 90-degree angles when they intersect. What that means algebraically is that their slopes are negative reciprocals. Bisect means that it splits it in half. And this is why I was like, segments, lines, right? So bisect means to split into two equal pieces. And what that means algebraically, right? So if we have a segment, a defined segment, if you're cutting it in half, you're going through the exact middle of that segment. And the exact middle of that segment is what we call the midpoint. So what it means to be a bisect is that it goes through the midpoint of that segment. So when we're trying to find algebraically the perpendicular bisector of a segment, because you can't cut a line in half because a line goes forever in either direction, right? So there is no beginning and end. So you can't find the middle because there is no place to define where the ends are. So you have to have a segment in order to find the perpendicular bisector. But the actual perpendicular bisector that cuts that segment in half, this guy right here, does not have to be a segment. It could be a line that cuts this segment in half, right? But you have to originally start with a segment in order to be able to find a midpoint. So if you, I don't think that this is in a formula packet. It's not explained at all anywhere, but it's explained in its name. It's inherently perpendicular. So what does that mean algebraically? And bisector, what does that mean algebraically? Think back to that and say, okay, well, it means 90-degree angles, negative reciprocal slopes. Cutting it in half means it goes through the middle, so midpoint, right? So trying to think about these as a way. There is a set of steps to do this, to find the perpendicular bisector. Now, IB will not necessarily be like, find the perpendicular bisector of this segment, right? It's going to be a little bit more complicated than that. It's going to be like, find the point of intersection between this and this, or find the distance between this point and this line, which is the perpendicular distance. I'll explain that in a second. So this is a set of steps just to find the perpendicular bisector. Sometimes sometimes you need to do a few other things or interpret what you have found in different ways. As always in the IB, you have to just be, this is one small pattern that could lead to other patterns coming through. Getting off my soapbox, I will then tell you the steps. So first, you're normally given a segment, so you need to find the slope and the midpoint of your original segment. PT is short for point. Of original segment. Once you've found the point, the midpoint and the slope, and you now need to find the slope of your perpendicular. Find, this symbol means perpendicular. Find perpendicular slope. So that's your negative reciprocal. Then you can make your line. Make perpendicular bisector line equation. EQ, it's short for equation. Okay, so here's a bunch of different ideas. So let's try and like separate them out. So that's kind of a set of steps. Above is more of a definition. And now let's talk about something else. You might be asked to, at some point, find the distance between a point and a line. So if I have a point right here and a line right here, the distance, if I were to ask you to go in and just draw the distance between this point and this line, you wouldn't say like, oh, that's the distance between the point and a line, right? That doesn't make sense in terms of the most efficient. If you were to go in and draw the distance between this point and this line, you would probably draw something that looks like that and realize that that is the perpendicular line that goes through this line. So here, it's not necessarily a perpendicular bisector, but when we're talking about a distance between a point and a line, we're talking about finding the line that is perpendicular to that line that goes through this point that you've been given. So it's still that same process of like finding your perpendicular slope, and then now this guy is your point that you plug in order to make the equation. But then you would have to find the point of intersection right here. And then you have to find the distance between those 2 points. So it's a very laborious process in order to get just that small little distance, but that is how you do that. Okay, find the equation of the perpendicular bisector shown as the dashed line on the graph of the line segment connecting those 2 points. So we start with a segment and it's been given to us. And so we're just gonna follow these set steps. These set steps are to first find the slope and the midpoint. So my original slope is going to be y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. So that's negative 2 over 4, which is negative 1/2. And then the midpoint, remember that the midpoint is the average of your values, right? So I'm going to add up my two x values, 1 plus 5, and then divide by how many I added, which is 2. And then 2 plus 0 divided by 2. So that's going to be 3, 1. So I've got a point. I know what that midpoint is right here. That's 3, 1. And I've got my original slope. Now I need to find my perpendicular slope, which is the negative reciprocal. It's already negative, so it's going to become positive, and 1 over 2 is going to become 2 over 1, which just all simplifies down to 2. So these are the pieces I need, the midpoint, and the perpendicular slope, in order to build that linear equation, because now I have a point and a slope, so I can just put it together in an equation. If you remember, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, not in your formula, something you have to know, formula packet. Y minus y1 is 1 equals 2 times x minus 3. You could leave it like that because I don't think it tells you what particular, just says find the equation. So you could technically leave it like that. If I'm not specific about it, if the IB is not specific about it, you have done what I've asked you to do. If you can say like, that's what you asked me to do, awesome. Yeah, that's totally what I asked you to do. So y equals 2x minus 6. I'm going to add 1. So I distributed the 2 to both of those pieces. And now I'm going to also add the 1 to both sides. Y equals 2x, and then minus 6 plus 1 is minus 5. And that's the equation of my perpendicular bisector. Okay, pretty short notes, pretty straightforward. Again, I just want to reiterate to you guys that I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have about your IA. I've made all the answer keys for your tests. So my job today and tomorrow are going to be to grade those as well. My hope is that this weekend I get caught up on all of the grading for you guys. I spent the past few weeks getting caught up on all the grading for my other classes, and so you guys are now what's on my agenda. I'm trying my best here, and I know that you guys are too. And please let me know if there's something I can do better or something I can do differently. I really appreciate you guys. Okay, bye.